Hey everyone, welcome to the most opinionated space podcast on the internet.
At Astra, the podcast where we talk about the intersection between space, policy, and technology.
I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
I have a Master's of Public Policy degree with a concentration in science and space policy.
And I'm a PhD in computer science and an all-around tech geek.
Okay, guys, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at @AdAstra_podcast, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our mailing list on elemental.fm to get regular updates from the team. And if you like what you hear, give us a 5-star review on iTunes and recommend us on Overcast.
So today we are going to be talking about, in our latest from Washington section, the newest White House liaison to NASA, some news about funding Space Corps, the new National Space Corps, and the future of ISS. In our space news highlight of the week, we'll celebrate NASA's birthday, which just passed on this past Saturday. In international news, we'll talk about the ISS's newest crew. They just launched a 3-man crew. And in latest in tech, we're going to be talking about money, from small businesses all the way to SpaceX. So, Jack, what's with this new White House liaison that I keep hearing about?
So this guy, Jonathan Dimmock, or Dimmock, I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name.
Looks
because
like Dimmock.
Dimmock. So Mr. Dimmock, he has sort of been around since the end of the campaign. As someone sort of shadowing or in the shadows of NASA as part of the transition team. So if you guys remember us talking about this, when a new presidency starts, or just before the new presidency starts, there's these things called transition teams. And they're the people that make sure everything goes smoothly on day one at the various agencies and departments across the federal government. And as with every other part of the federal government, NASA has a transition team. The landing team are the first people on the ground. They're usually the ones who set up what the policy priorities are going to be for at least the next year or so. They usually set up major positions, who's going to be, what nominee at what level, and so on. As people are pretty aware, NASA does not have an administrator right now. We have our acting administrator, Robert Lightfoot, but we have yet to get any solid news on who the future NASA administrator will be. So Jonathan Dimmock is probably the closest thing we have to that, to an administration voice in NASA. So he's the White House liaison within NASA, meaning he is the direct line between the White House and NASA. Problem being, no one really knows who this guy is. From what we can tell from his LinkedIn and Facebook, this is some real investigative journalism right here, that he is very into cars, Red Bull, and Donald Trump.
Those are like his three race things. Cars quite a bit.
like a lot. Like most of his pictures are of race cars or of him drinking Red Bull. So either NASA will soon be sponsored by Red Bull, or this guy just flies really low under the radar. I don't have any mutual connections with him. I mean, like this guy is completely off the grid. And so he got this job as a White House liaison from an email. So that might sound a little unprofessional, but that's usually what happens. Is you have the transition team core members who focus on a specific agency or policy area. In this case, these folks, Michael and Brian, I think his last name's Jack, actually. Okay, so that's interesting. But so he was talking to both of them, who are in charge of all the science, energy, and space portfolio for the transition team, and requested he be put as a liaison. After having worked on the campaign, he asked to be put on as a liaison for one of these agencies that he lists. And so he lists the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, which, as it stands with the new National Space Council coming in, OSTP is going to play a very small role, I think, in developing policy priorities for the administration. He also mentions the Department of Energy and what he calls the National Aeronautic Space Administration, which I'm assuming he means NASA. At 59 years old, I feel like people know that it's Aeronautics and Space Administration, but who knows? So he basically comes in with this email saying, here's my resume. These are the things I want to work on. I worked on the campaign. This is like how I want to help the administration move forward. But he just gets some things wrong. So not only is he not very well connected, and this isn't to say that I don't have friends on the Republican side of space. I have a lot of friends everywhere. I have a lot of, I know people on the Republican side, and they don't know who this guy is either. And he also claims that NASA, or as he alludes to it as the Deep Space Exploration Administration, which was an idea from like 20 years ago, he claims that NASA, or DESA, has a budget of $105.5 billion.
So as far as experience goes, can you talk to me a little bit about the previous White House liaison and what that was, and like the previous experience that he had?
So the previous liaison, you're talking about under the Obama administration,
yes,
correct?
Yes.
So under the Obama administration, it was the transition team, the Brian and Molly in this email, were these people, Lori Garver and David Newman, which you've heard both of their names before. We've met them multiple times.
Absolutely.
Wonderful women in space. But so they were two of the biggest names, and Lori actually became the associate administrator, or the deputy administrator is what it's called,
right.
Which is the only other Senate confirmed position within NASA other than the administrator. And then Dava became deputy administrator after Lori left. Anyway, so the previous White House liaison, I can't remember their name off the top of my head, but usually what the liaison acts as is the person who is on the ground until they pick an administrator. Sometimes it's even the same person. But the liaison is such a very fluid position. It depends on the administration, what their needs are. Of course, under the Obama administration, one of their first things they did within the first year was pick an administrator and end the Constellation program. So the first year could be a very active time for the White House liaison, or it could be very silent, as it has been. I mean, it's kind of interesting to note that this guy's name has not come up in any articles or any sort of publication about what the administration's space policy is. With the introduction of NSPAC, the National Space Council, you think that he would have a much larger role within the administration and be sort of behind the scenes doing things. And for all we know, he could be, but it would require him to be active within the community, I think. And I have not seen him before at events that we've run. We've invited him, certainly, but he has not shown up to any previous event. Again, I mean, looking just at his LinkedIn profile, it still says he works for the campaign. So if you're, the White House liaison for NASA, you feel like that would be like the first thing on your resume, but obviously either he's not active on LinkedIn or, he isn't really doing the job. So it's sort of this weird thing I found. Keith Cowing over at NASA Watch posted an article and has a number of articles about Jonathan and about the transition team going into NASA for the Trump administration. But there really isn't much else to say about this, because there isn't much news coming out of NASA. It's all been out of the White House.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
With NSPAC, the announcement of an administrator, which we're assuming is going to happen soon, is all going to come out of the White House and not NASA. So we're seeing a shift from an agency centered process to an administration centered process for releasing news and bring about updates about the space program. But can you imagine a budget of $105 billion for NASA? And if that was just what it was?
I I'm not sure NASA would know what to do with that much money. I think part of, and this kind of hurts the cause that we're usually pushing, but I think part of the reason NASA is so efficient with its money is that it is doing a lot with a little. Right? 100. I mean that would be a fairly sizable budget, and I don't know if they have. I mean, there are certainly ideas on the table, but I don't know if they are if they have the if they are prepared for that kind of budget.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think NASA can hit a critical mass of funding before then it turns into wasted spending.
Right. I mean, every organization.
Or maybe not wasted, but duplicative, and overrun budgets and have too much wiggle room, because the reason NASA's been so successful is because it has these constraints on it sometimes.
Right. I mean, every agency has can have some point of critical mass. I mean, the agency that people talk about, having the most funding is always DoD, and I wouldn't say that the DoD is completely full of waste. There's a lot of efficient work that goes on within DoD, but I certainly would say that there sometimes is waste, given its fairly disposable income at this point. And I think that could happen to any agency, as well as NASA. Now, would I be excited if they got that kind of budget? Hell yeah. But I don't see it happening.
Yeah. So I guess this is going to be my call out to Jonathan. If he wants to make his first public appearance, please do it on our show.
Absolutely.
If we can be the epicenter of some new news about NASA, that would be great. But yeah, there isn't much going on in that.
I'll bring the Red Bull.
Yeah, you bring the Red Bull. I'll get some Hot Wheel cars or something, and we'll entice him over. So the next bit of news is following up on something that we've been talking on and off about the last couple of weeks, and that's this idea of a Space Corps. So in the National Defense Authorization Act, which passed the House on July 14th, it includes a provision for a Space Corps being created within the Air Force by the end of 2019, analogous to the Marine Corps within the Navy. So it would basically, the idea is to consolidate all of the different elements of the Air Force that deal with space and put it under one roof, assumingly in the Pentagon, that deals with all space issues. Now, some people have talked about this as, or at least the mainstream media have talked about it as, oh, we're going to have like land troops in space. That's not the case. I think there was it would be a little odd to have land troops in space. I'm not gonna lie. yeah. I mean, they wouldn't be on land, right?
Yeah. There's that whole land part.
But then there was also this idea that that there was going to be I think it was the chief of staff for the Army. If I find the link, I'll include it in the show notes. But I think it was the chief of staff of the Army, or he was retired chief of staff of the Army, something, where he described the idea of having an orbital station that had troops on it ready to go at a moment's notice to land anywhere on the globe. And so that's what people think of when they think of a Space Corps, but that's not at all what a Space Corps would be. So Space Corps is going to be tracking space debris. They're going to be tracking launches around the globe, maintaining satellites, making sure that people stay within their allotted radio spectrum. So it's not as glamorous as Space Marines or anything, but it does get people talking.
I mean, you hit a huge point. There is a major cyber component to space, and I mean, there are world regulatory bodies for regulating things like you talked about, maintaining your part of the electromagnetic spectrum and only broadcasting things on those frequencies that have been agreed upon by world radio organizations and things like that, as well as just space communications in general, not being able to send jamming signals, things like that. Those are regulated right now by international bodies who are doing it sort of in a cooperative manner, but there's not really a sense of enforcement outside of diplomacy, and obviously if someone really started jamming parts of the spectrum, there would be sanctions and things like that. This is sort of the next step in or the next layer of enforcement that they're trying to push.
Yeah, so it's along this paradigm that I described last week, moving from space, from a sanctuary, space being a sanctuary, to a control, having control of space, using space as a weapon or weaponizing space, to full force activation by space, not just force enhancement, which force enhancement's, making sure our troops have access to satellite communications, whereas force activation would be, okay, we're going to, shoot down an enemy aircraft with a laser beam from space, which isn't being talked about, but that's just an example of something that force activation might be.
So odds are it won't be that exciting for a while.
Oh yeah, not a while. I mean, this is something we've talked about that, maybe in the future that it'll be time. Maybe it's time right now that we start working towards a Space Corps or even a Space Force. But the ability to get the technology up there that would make space warfare readily available and possible is still a long way off. So the next hurdle for the Space Corps is that with this authorization, the NDAA, you need an appropriation as well. You can't, Congress can say, can authorize billions and billions of dollars, and they do every year, trillions even. But that means nothing if the money isn't actually there to push it forward. So as part of the appropriations process, which has to be done before September 30th, unless we want a government shutdown, there is the appropriations subcommittees that meet, and defense has its own subcommittee. And part of what they're trying to do is put in, and it's Scott Perry, he's a Republican from Pennsylvania, proposed an amendment to ban the DoD from spending any money on a Space Corps. So even if the authorization were to pass the Senate and go on to and be signed by the president, that there would still be no money for it, that it would be banned from spending money on it. And that proposal, that amendment, was denied. So the House Rules Committee basically says what's germane and what is allowed to be an amendment or not on any particular piece of legislation, and they said no to this amendment on the Space Corps. So if
it was close though. It was 209 that was the 209-214 vote from earlier this month, right?
Actually, this is from at the time of recording, this is from 6 days ago.
Okay.
So it wasn't a vote. It was a decision by the Rules Committee, so that they didn't even vote on it. So the Rules Committee voted on it, but the Rules Committee is like 30 people, and they I think it was a closer vote in there. The article that we have linked down below doesn't actually have the numbers of who voted. Sometimes those numbers are hidden.
I was taking a look at the defense policy bill from earlier last month. Well, in July. It'll be last month by the time you guys are listening to this.
So that's in which the
Space Corps was also a part of it. Yeah. And Mattis was attempting to back that pretty hard, but didn't work out.
Which is kind of weird because there's all these different parts of the government, and it's not a party line vote either, of people who are for the Space Corps and people who are against it. So on the for side, you have Mike Rogers and Jim Cooper. Mike Rogers, a Republican from Alabama, Cooper, a Democrat from Tennessee, both in favor. They're basically in charge of the House Armed Services Committee, and they were, they're all gung-ho about it. And then you have people like Scott Perry or Mac Thornberry, who's a Republican from Texas, who are against it. I mean, you have these Republicans who are against it, Republicans that are for it, Democrats that are for it, Democrats that are against it. It's a very complex issue because some people think that our space program in the defense side is mature enough to warrant an entire Space Corps. Now, I would agree with them in the sense that we're eventually going to have to get to this point where all of our space assets are centralized within the Air Force, most likely. Just to make things easier as the utilization of space for defense purposes grows. But I don't think we're at that point quite yet. I mean, we can't even launch people on rockets from the United States right now. Like, how are we going to utilize a space corps to its fullest potential? I think it puts the cart before the horse on a lot of different issues, not just human spaceflight. But yeah, I mean, there's this growing concern that the Space Corps is actually going to get authorized. It passed the House. All that has to happen now is it has to pass the Senate with the the NDAA has to pass the Senate with the Space Corps language in it, and then it has to be signed by the president, which even the administration is apprehensive about signing any bit of legislation that includes Space Corps. But if the question is whether they're going to sign the National Defense Authorization Act over what might be less than 1% of the overall DoD budget, I don't think that's going to sway them. But they're going to fight tooth and nail until that decision point comes to make sure that we're not jumping the gun on a Space Corps. Because the last thing this administration needs is another scandal about how they're not handling issues the proper way.
Sure.
So yeah, there's quite a bit going on with the Space Corps. Again, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll update everybody when it's time for the next big vote to occur. And I guess maybe the final thing that we got going from Washington before we move on to the space news highlight of the week is that the ISS has been the center point of a lot of civil space discussions, civil and commercial space discussions since earlier this month when the International Space Station Research and Development Conference took place here in DC. It was the 6th annual conference. Over 1,000 people attended. Some of the keynote speakers included Robert Bigelow of Bigelow Enterprises and Elon Musk of, I think, what does he do? SpaceX? Is that Elon Musk?
Yeah, I think he's got like I don't know, an e-commerce company or something like that.
The guy from the Boring Company. That's the guy.
That guy from PayPal?
But yeah, so at this conference, I know people were talking a lot about Musk backtracking on some of his statements about what Red Dragon, their mission to Mars, and the International or Interplanetary Transport System, ITS, what those two things are going to be able to do. He backtracked on a lot of big things and then teased some big announcement later this year about Falcon Heavy and for Red Dragon, but didn't really give much away. One of the big focuses of foci of the conference was on the International Space Station. A lot of people are getting a little nervous about the ISS because, I mean, we're 7 years away from the decommissioning of the ISS. Supposedly,
it's coming real soon. Yes.
And within the NASA Transition Authorization Act, the big thing that passed earlier this year, that NASA was directed to develop an ISS transition plan. And it's important to note that it says transition plan and not a decommission plan. So a decommission plan would be, this is how we're going to deorbit it, and this is where it's going to deorbit, and this is how we're going to pick up the pieces. No, they're talking about taking the ISS, and this is an idea that's been on the table for a long time, taking the ISS and turning it into a commercial entity over time, so as we've talked about before, low Earth orbit right now is sort of a hotbed for commercial space innovation. So you have your SpaceXs, your OneWebs, your O3Bs that are doing a lot of stuff in low Earth orbit. The ISS would also in low Earth orbit, but it would sort of open up the human side of commercial space exploration. So that's sort of the ultimate goal for the ISS, is to turn it into a commercial space station to lay the groundwork for future commercial space stations, whether that's hotels or casinos in space, whatever it ends up being, or research institutions as the ISS is. But there were a lot of detractors from this idea, or at least of pushing this agenda forward now, sort of in the same vein as with the Space Corps being a little premature. Mary Lynn Dittmar, who is in charge of the Deep Space, I think it's the Deep Space Exploration Alliance. I think is the name of it. But she says, I think the thing that we have to guard against is this notion that somehow we have to make this decision right now. And this decision being how we're going to deal with ISS decommissioning in 2024. When that's not even a solid date. Well, yeah. I mean, I think right. the first decision we have to make is whether ISS is ending in 2024, 2028, or as I feared earlier, 2030 is now the new number that people are talking about.
It seems more likely. I mean, honestly, my opinion, at the pace of decision making and stability of our government when it comes to international affairs, particularly, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at this point if we pushed it all the way back until then. I mean, but there becomes technical concerns, after a certain point. Not that NASA has never made any capability that doesn't survive 10, 20 years past its runtime, but I mean, this is a life-supporting capability. So we'll see how long, there may be a significant difference between supporting the ISS and actually executing missions on the ISS. So I don't see us executing missions there until 2030, but we may still be supporting it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see anything really replacing it until at least 2032. I mean, not 2032 as in 2030 also. But I think you're right that with them bringing up this idea, I feel like it's every time NASA says, oh, this mission might be extended until this new later date, that new later date is the year everyone focuses on now.
Sure.
So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if ISS went for the, 25 years on orbit in 2030 or around there. I just kind of worry about those technical difficulties. I mean, because as of right now, over 50% of our budget for ISS is used as upkeep and not even to perform missions there. So what is it going to look like in 10, 13 years when ISS is literally falling apart and we give it over to the commercial sector and say, hey, you did so great with the low Earth orbit economy. Here's this bucket of bolts that you can use for the commercial human exploration economy. I just don't see that happening. Well,
there are, I don't know. I have a hard time judging economic markets and the things that people can come up with. It's risky to bet that some surprise is going to come out of nowhere and spawn a new market that that the international space that ISS will actually sort of be the backbone of. It's, I don't know. I think a firm decision needs to be made about it. I think from the government's standpoint, I would like us to continue forward with all of the talk about the Deep Space Gateway and the Deep Space Transport and having those be our newer, hopefully less focused on versions of ISS, and by less focused on, I mean not our main space mission, but a transport, a backbone mechanism for executing a number of new main space missions in deep space. But a firm decision does need to get made about ISS over the next several years for it to have any utility past that date.
Yeah, and I think
the 2024.
I think Jeffrey Manber, who's CEO of NanoRacks, which is a company that's been involved in the space arena for over a decade now, almost two decades. I can't remember when NanoRacks started, but either way, Manber came out and said that by 2019 we should have a definitive plan, and I agree with him. And within the NASA Transition Act that we were talking about earlier, there is a provision in there that says by December 1st of this year, 2017, NASA needs to have some sort of plan in place, or at least have a study conducted that lays out what their different options are, whether it's just reiterating that 2024, 28, or 30 paradigm, or if it's really realizing what the best option is. That's going to come out this year. And then by 2019, as Manber says, we need to have a definitive plan and start working towards that as soon as possible. If it's a 5-year program that we have to put in place by 2024, it gets transitioned over to commercial. Like, I think 5 years is the bare minimum that we need to do this. So let's keep this in mind. But there are a lot bigger fish to fry in the immediate term. So that's sort of my thoughts on the ISS right now. So Newton, you had a birthday this weekend, right?
I had a birthday on July 29th. That's probably the most important thing that's ever happened on a July 29th in the history of humankind. But
you share your birthday with something else government agency, I think.
Some government agency. Okay, so let's back it up a little bit, beyond July 29th, 1986 and beyond even July 29th, 1958. And we'll get to why that date's important in a second. So on October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union launched the world's first artificial satellite called Sputnik. Okay, this is an emptied out missile casing that was effectively floating above the United States' head. Everyone in the country freaked out. The U.S. had to take a set of specific strategic actions in order to counter this Soviet threat. So that was on October 4th, 1957. And that's what really kicked off this space race between the Soviet Union and the United States. Two major responses came from that. The first happened in February 1958. President Dwight D. Eisenhower launched a new agency known as ARPA, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, which had a goal of making sure that the U.S. was never that technologically surprised again. Okay, and we could talk about ARPA for forever on another show. It's now known as DARPA. But the other agency that was launched on July 29th, 1958, was the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, also known as NASA. And for the last 59 years, we're almost at 60, NASA has led research and development, the highest risk research and development that humankind has ever has ever achieved. And at 59 years old, they are still going strong with a number of missions planned as well as being executed to each of the different planets in the solar system, to moons of both our planet as well as other planets. Things like Jupiter, we've explored Enceladus of Saturn. We were planning on exploring Europa, and this agency has changed our lives in a million different ways. We don't even have to talk about spin-offs. We can talk about scientific return. We can talk about a stronger sense of pride in the United States, as well as spurring innovation and motivating children to become scientists, engineers, or just motivating them to do anything courageous and adventurous. NASA's had a significant impact on people in the United States as well as around the world. It's one of the most well-known symbols, the NASA symbol, around the world. Things like the Air and Space Smithsonian, which has a significant amount of history about NASA. It's one of the most visited museums in the world. NASA's had a significant impact on the world at large, and as we've been discussing here in both this episode as well as previous episodes, as will we in future episodes, it touches literally everything. So happy birthday to NASA. Well, happy belated birthday. We're recording this on the 31st. Its birthday was on the 29th, as was mine. and I'm hoping for many more wonderful missions, scientific results, and really cool future projects in technology.
So happy birthday to NASA. So make sure you tweet at NASA. Happy birthday. I'm sure they'll enjoy it.
Happy birthday.
They don't have other things going on, do they? They're not busy with anything, right?
No. I mean, they literally just sit on Twitter all day. Like, that's really about it.
Yeah, it's not like there's a new crew member of the ISS from NASA, is there?
Oh, is there a new crew? Oh, no way. So on the day before NASA's most recent birthday, their 59th birthday, they launched, with the help of a Russian Soyuz rocket, 3 veteran space travelers from the U.S., Russia, and Italy into orbit. That's what they were doing, is kicking off a 5-month mission to the International Space Station. So the International Space Station has 3 new tenants. They successfully launched last Friday morning from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, which just borders Russia in the north and the west. All 3 space travelers have been to space before. Cosmonaut Sergei Ryazensky first trained for space flights as the commander of a crew during Russia's 105-day Mars 500 isolation experiment in 2009. And he also served as flight engineer aboard the Soyuz TMA-10M spacecraft in 2013 and spent 166 days in space. This is actually going to be his second launch and long duration mission. So shout out to Sergey. The astronaut Randy Bresnik will also be accompanying them on this mission. He's the American on this mission. He commanded the underwater Nemo 19 mission, that name's short for NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations, in 2014. This will also be his second space flight and his first long duration mission. So first time, 5 months out there. He flew to the space station aboard a NASA shuttle before in 2009. And in fact, he also experienced some baby jitters when his daughter was scheduled to be born the day of his first spacewalk. I don't know if you remember hearing about that story. And finally, the Italian astronaut Paolo Nespoli. He's heading to space for the 3rd time. He flew for 2 weeks on the space shuttle in 2007 to help install a module of the space station, and he revisited the space station in 2010 for a 160-day mission, so just 6 days short of Sergei. He's an Italian astronaut with ESA, and his science mission for ESA is called VITA, short for Vitality, Innovation, Technology, and Ability. They're going to join Peggy Winston on the famed astronaut that we continuously talk about here, who basically, she's like a resident of space now, right? She can get like a space driver's license at this point,
I feel
right?
like they got to have a space passport for her.
Yeah,
like when she comes back down.
I'm pretty sure she's like, she feels like space is more of a home than Earth at this point. She's been breaking records for the longest time in space. How long has she been up there at this point?
She has been up there. That's what I was just looking up. She broke the record of 534 days back in April, and she's still up there. So what would that make it?
Back in April. That was what? That was about 3 months ago. So roughly, she's at around over
610,
630. Yeah, 620, 630 days. So yeah, Peggy's been up there quite a while. Fyodor Yurchishkin from Roscosmos is still up there, and Jack Fisher of Colorado. We talked about him on a previous show. He's still up there. They've been studying how microgravity impacts cancer therapies since April, and have been measuring the composition of meteors orbiting Earth's atmospheres. The 3 new folks will be participating in a diverse array of research projects, including a phenomenon that's perhaps of special interest to the astronauts already in orbit: the puffy face appearance that astronauts have in microgravity. This has to do with the body's fluids, the impact of the body's fluids on on the body in microgravity. One of the effects of living in space is a tendency of bodily fluid to move up towards the head, which may lead to vision damage. So they're going to be assessing the impacts of that, as well as other research in biology, biotechnology, physical science, and earth science. So they're going to remain at the space station until mid-December, and we'll see what comes of their research. Once again, this is why the ISS is so important. We get so much scientific return, and things like medical research. This is the ISS is probably the space-based mission that's given us the most scientific return in terms of the medical and biology community, because humans have lived there in space more so than on any other platform. So I look forward to hearing more about that.
And there's an experiment on there from the Michael J. Fox Foundation.
What?
Yeah, there's it's part of the ISS Science for Everyone program, where the Michael J. Fox Foundation is sending up a protein, the LRRK2 protein, which has been implicated with Parkinson's disease. So
that's
there
interesting.
might be some new cures, or maybe not cures, but remediations for Parkinson's disease that come out of ISS research. So very interesting. Cool. So that I think concludes international news. It's not a very big week internationally, other than Expedition 52, which, like, I still have my patch from Expedition 50.
Oh, nice.
And I'm like, I have 50 and I have 40. I think I have a pin from 49, like a lapel pin from 49. And like, those people have been off the ISS for like over a year now.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. No, I get excited every time I hear about new missions on the ISS. I mean, like I said, just the scientific impact you can get from humans actually being in space and studying the effect, studying things like manufacturing, biology, medicine, biotechnology, and just all manner of physical sciences up there. It's such a unique environment, and has given us a lot of scientific return in the past. So I'm happy to hear about the new crew. But moving on to latest in tech, and I'm just going to give a brief description of this. But NASA has selected 19 proposals from American Small Business and Research Institutions, or SBIRs, for Phase 2 of its Competitive Small Business Technology Transfer Program, or STTR. They gave out $14.3 million in awards. This is Phase 2 for the proof of concepts that came out last year in 2016, in the 2016 STTR program. Basically, each of these small businesses got funded a very tiny amount of money, tiny being in, the few $100K level. I think maybe one or two got $1 million, to generate proofs of concepts for space travel, from things like nanosatellites to studies of biological effects and forming creating new biology in space. They generated proofs of concepts, and a larger number of teams did, and then these 19 proposals got selected for the Phase 2 of the program. The goal of this STTR program is to stimulate partnerships between small businesses and research institutions by providing awards for cooperative research and development efforts with potential for commercialization. So they're not just doing this for space missions. They're also looking to sort of stimulate the American economy by doing this, much in the way several other government organizations do. So I'll leave the link for the abstracts for each of the 19 selected proposals in the show notes. They're actually pretty neat. They give the abstract what was proposed to be developed, and it looks like NASA asked for this, to give the straightforward answer to the question, what is the NASA application for this and what is the non-NASA application for this? So NASA is also looking at transition with this program. How does this apply to Navy, Army, FAA, FCC, you name it, NIH? How can this be applied to all of these other groups? And basically, while they had an initial proof of concept in the first go around, they're going to be looking. It sounds like they're going to be looking for something a little bit more robust, but that can be easily transitioned to other agencies, much in the way DARPA programs usually run. So I'm interested in seeing what comes of this. I'll be tracking it, and like I said, the abstracts will be in the show notes.
Yeah. So a big thing out of Hawthorne, California, the hotbed of space innovation with SpaceX, is that they have raised an additional $350 million in funding. Because they're a private company. They have to be funded somehow. They have private benefactors. So they raised over $350 million in their Series H funding round, and that puts them at a valuation of $21.2 billion, making it one of the most valuable privately held companies today.
Insane. And note, privately held. They're not a public company. They haven't gone public yet.
I don't even think Elon wants to go public with it.
I don't think there's a plan to go public. Trust me, I've been keeping an eye on it this entire time. Orbital's got my money.
Well, at least their rockets are actually going to get there. Sorry.
You talk trash about a company that's worth $21 billion. All right?
I'm just jealous that they're worth so much money. Do you know how many Chipotle burritos I could buy with $21.2 billion?
Around $4 billion.
Yes. Around that much. But yeah, so this new valuation of $21.2 billion is up 75% since January 2015, when SpaceX was valued at $12 billion, and that was even after an investment of $1 billion by Fidelity and Google in the company. So people have been all over SpaceX in recent years, as witnessed by us, by everyone in the space community, and everyone at large too. Elon has built an empire on space, not in space quite yet.
So going back real quick though, I think you were mistaken earlier. Earlier you said that it's the most it's not the most valued private company. It actually sits with about a half a dozen other companies in the world that have hit the $20 billion mark. But that's literally 6 private companies.
It's one of the $20 billion
mark. Yeah, it's one of the most valuable. There's groups like Uber, which is estimated to be worth nearly $70 billion, and Airbnb, which is worth more than $30 billion. So, it's joined the ranks of those giants. And those two, the difference is those two things are used by literally everyone on Earth, whereas SpaceX is a company that's their main customers are DoD, NASA, FAA, and communications companies like television companies, things like that, hitching a ride to space, which is really neat for this little company that started in 2002 with venture capitalists, I guess you would call him, Elon Musk. I guess he takes some risks on business and all that.
Only a few though.
They started out in 2002, and really had this push to build what is now known as the Falcon 9 rocket, and has seen some real success over the last nearly a year at this point. They had like 6 to 9 months in terms of the actual reusability and all of that. But they have certainly made their strides. They've certainly either taken risk or announced that they were taking risks to get everyone excited. But they have taken the risks. This is truly a unique company, where the drive of the company is truly led by its CEO Elon Musk. So props to him for passing this threshold. Not that he needs the money, but
well, you never know. I mean, with Falcon Heavy coming up, assuming they're going to be incurring a lot more costs with whatever they develop after that, with the interplanetary transport system being their long-term goal, but the requisite components of it being short to midterm goals for them. I think this $21 billion valuation is going to help a long way in finding new investors in this pretty volatile market up until this point. I think this is maybe the first time in over 100 years that there's been a steady funding source for commercial science and space exploration. I mean, that it even goes back to observatories and aeronautics startups, over 150 years ago even.
Sure.
So this is good news. SpaceX being the most, I would then say it's the most valuable privately held space company, right? Would you agree with that? Because ULA is publicly traded.
The MVPHSC?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you just said the show title.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, shout out to SpaceX. They have made significant strides not only in getting to this point in terms of financially, but inspiring people. And that's something that's invaluable. That's usually something that's left up to NASA. I mean, no offense to groups like Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman, while they do have STEM campaigns and things like that, I can't think of many companies that have inspired people in terms of going to space like SpaceX. And that's just by him boasting that very American spirit. Elon Musk is South African, but he boasted this very American, or what's stereotypically American spirit of taking these high risks, and doing things that could have dire consequences on you financially, but taking these high risks and getting a payoff and just being that courageous about something that you're really that you have a strong dream for. So yeah, I'm happy to see that things are going well for this company. I think it not only helps SpaceX, but it also helps NASA. It helps our advocacy for for doing space research and executing space missions, and it just helps the world in general. So,
all right,
shout out to you, Musk.
Go SpaceX. And also, speaking of space people who make a lot of money,
more space people, more rich people,
more
for a brief stretch. For a brief stretch on Thursday, Jeff Bezos was the richest man in the world.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy. I remember seeing these articles break on like Forbes on Thursday, just getting all of these updates that Jeff Bezos had dropped, had surpassed Bill Gates as the richest man, as the richest man in the world. On Thursday, I believe this was Thursday. This was around Thursday morning time frame. Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon and all of its subsidiaries, had a momentary surge in Amazon stock that pushed Bezos' wealth to $90.6 billion, which surpasses the current richest man in the world, Bill Gates' fortune, by $500 million, according to the Forbes article. Bezos didn't hold the crown for too long, though. By 1:30 p.m. that day, Amazon stock had dropped by about 2% from its morning high, and Gates' title was restored. All was right with the world.
The patron saint of geeks finally reigns supreme.
Yes. Yes, the geek's back. But this just shows how strong Jeff Bezos has gotten with Amazon, all of its subsidiary, all of the markets that it touches, as well as the new space rocket company Blue Origin, which will be seeing profits fairly soon. They're seeing some profits now, but this company, for all the fire that it's come under lately and the scrutiny that it's come under lately, is doing pretty well. I don't think that's a surprise that Amazon is doing well, but they have faced a lot of scrutiny at sort of a massive scale by diving into all of these different markets lately. I mean, Amazon is in groceries and all manner of all manner of house services and video streaming services and things like that. Recently, they made an announcement that they were planning to acquire even Whole Foods for $14 billion. And they got some serious flack for that because of the whole, you can't have a monopoly in the United States thing. So they're still under fire for that. And some folks, even the current president of the United States, even said of Bezos that he thinks that President Trump will go after him for antitrust because he's controlling so much of the market. That was back when he was a candidate back in May 2016. But overall, Bezos seems to be doing pretty well. He's currently the seventh person to have held the title of the world's richest person, and the third American to top the global ranks, besides Bill Gates and the CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett. So Bezos is doing well. What do you think this means for Blue Origin in terms of their CEO hitting? Does this mean anything? I don't think this really has a significant impact either way.
It just means that so long as a New Glenn rocket does not fall on the city of Miami, Florida, they will.
Specifically Miami?
Any city. So long as it doesn't fall on any city in the United States. Is that fine? That their funding worries will never exist. Like where SpaceX did worry in those first decade really, before Falcon 1 even launched in 2008. Those first 6 to 10 years at SpaceX were very worrisome for Musk. I mean, he talks all the time about having to sleep on friends' couches, and he's a billionaire because of how much money he was putting into his space company. Bezos is worth $90.6 billion. That is almost 5 NASAs. So I think Blue Origin's going to be just fine. And this just means Bezos has some money to play around with and invest it where it's needed. So if something in the New Glenn architecture isn't working, technologically speaking, something's not meeting a deadline, he will have the money to throw at it. All right, and that gets us to about the hour mark right now. So Newton, as we just said, we're going to sort of curtail the episode right here. Adrienne, you submitted a question for us to cover about the commercial contracts that will be involved in developing deep space and off-planet habitats. We will cover that as our first thing next week's episode. So stay tuned for that. We did not miss your question. We just had a lot to talk about when it came to Jeff Bezos and a lot of billionaires. So don't blame us. Blame the Billionaire Boys Club.
The 1%.
Blame the 1%, Adrienne. So yeah, I think that's where we're going to end the episode for this week. We don't really have much for coming soon to space other than the Eclipse is coming up. And we will, I think, Newton, we're planning a very special live stream, right? Is that what we were going to do?
We are definitely having a live stream of the event. We'll be out in Nashville, Tennessee. If you want to come find us, say hi to us, donate to the show. No, I'm just kidding.
Donate food. That would be great.
donating food to the show. We're going to be basically just on a long road trip, and we'll be in need of food. So come out and meet us in Nashville.
Come out and meet us in Nashville, or follow the stream. I'm sure we're going to have it on Facebook, and I don't know. Can you do that on Twitter? I don't know.
Tweet, Face, Insta Smash, whatever it is.
Insta Smash. Okay, that's a new thing.
And don't forget to, and if you are going out, don't forget to bring safe glasses. There's been a number of marketing campaigns for glasses that seem fairly unsafe for solar eclipses. We can even leave a link in the show notes to give you some instructions on those.
And also make sure you don't. You might think it's safe to put the glasses on and then look through a pair of binoculars at the sun. Please do not do that, because it just acts like a giant magnifying glass. And if you've ever played with a magnifying glass in a hill of ants, or an anthill, like, it doesn't end well, right? So don't do that to your eyes.
No bueno.
Don't do that to ants. Just, buy a solar, or what are they called? Soloculars? Solar binoculars?
Go look at a solar telescope.
Go to Amazon.com. We are not sponsored, but go to Amazon.com and find your solar binoculars.
No, quit giving Bezos more money, God. Anyway, on that note.
As always, I'm Jack.
And I'm Newton.
At Astra.